This is Chick2Chick Uncut, raw and unfiltered.
Pennsylvania is home to the 5th largest elderly population in the country. That's a lot of old people. That's also a lot of adult children stressing out, having to make tough decisions about their elderly parents, especially if that parent is having some sort of a health issue. You know, they're faced with all types of tough questions. Do they allow their elderly parent to stay home alone, which might not be a safe situation? Do they place them in assisted living? Do they place them in independent living? How do they have that conversation with their elderly parent? Do they know the difference between all of these facilities? And here's a big one. As a caregiver, how do you continue to take care of your elderly parent, again, who might have health issues, while still taking care of yourself? This is a really important podcast. There's so much information to unpack here with our guest today, Joanne Grossi. She is with AARP Pennsylvania. She is the state president emeritus. Joanne, thank you so much for coming on this podcast. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Flora. Thank you for having me.
All right, before we launch into everything, give us a little bit about your background and your experience working with elderly issues.
Well, as state president emeritus of AARP, I actually was state president for 7 years. And before that, I had a career in public health, having worked at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And I was also Deputy Secretary of Health for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So I've worked on issues about public health for the elderly, for literally over 30 years. And then, of course, I also had a personal experience in that I took care of my father for 10 and a half years. After my mother died, I started becoming his primary caregiver.
So let's talk about that, your own personal experience taking care of your elderly father for 10 and a half years. How did the care start? How did it end? And how did you make these tough decisions?
Yeah, so when my mother died, my father was 83, and he was still healthy enough to live at home. But especially, I think, being a man, he was not capable of all of taking care of himself. So I, on a regular basis, cooked his meals, cleaned his clothes, cleaned the house, took him to doctor's appointments, took him to the casino, took him to church. So I was probably devoting at least, 20 hours a week to taking care of my dad. And that was for the first 8 years after my mom died, until his early 90s. And then for 2 years after that, he came to live with me, which was incredibly, incredibly difficult. And then for the last 8 months of his life, he finally had to go into assisted living when I was no longer able to take care of him.
That's a long time to take care of an elderly parent. It sounds like you did a lot. Sounds like you were an awesome daughter. This had to take a toll on you. How did this affect you and your life and your own well-being?
Yeah, absolutely took a toll. And I think any caregiver would probably tell you that. And it took a toll on a number of levels. It took a toll financially because I actually retired earlier than I would have wanted to, because finally I just couldn't keep, taking care of his house and, taking him to appointments and still work full time. So I retired early. So it was a hit financially. I was a hit emotionally, especially when he came to live with me. It was just 24/7. And I didn't really have a personal life at all. And so it took a toll on me physically as well, because I wasn't able to take care of myself the way I normally would, couldn't work out, couldn't, be out with friends, couldn't be active the way I normally would. So it really took a toll on every aspect of my life.
I hate to ask this, but I have to. Did you get to a point where you started to resent your dad? Did you feel like your life was in such upheaval that you were angry at any moment? There were definitely moments of resentment and anger, and I was disappointed in myself. There'd be times I'd yell at him. I think it's really important to have honest conversations about this, Yeah.
I got angry at him, and I got angry in general, and I would speak to him sometimes in ways that I was really felt guilty about and was really disappointed in myself in. But, then I tried to give myself some grace, because it was just 24/7 of someone just needing you all the time. And I think you literally have to be a saint to not get angry or upset at sometimes. But I didn't even like in some ways who I was becoming because I was, angry and resentful. And I didn't like that about myself. But on the other hand, I understood why I was becoming that way because it was really a real burden. I mean, and again, it's just important to admit that it was a burden. People would say to me, what a blessing to be able to take care of your dad. And I would say to them, no, it's a burden. And I think we have to be honest about that. I still did it. I don't regret doing it. I'm still glad I did it. He was my dad and I loved him and I honored him, but I'm not going to make pretend that it wasn't a burden. It was.
Well, and I appreciate your honesty and your transparency. And I appreciate you admitting that, yeah, I mean, I'm going through a similar situation right now with my own mom, that she is in skilled nursing. She fell and she had some injuries. And it's this constant calling and calling and calling about this and that. And what am I supposed to do? There are some days like I feel like I can't breathe. So let's break this down step by step. Here you are, an adult child. You have an elderly parent. They don't want to leave their home. Let's start by making that first decision. How do you decide, okay, it's safe to leave them in their home? They're 87, they're 88, they're 89. What things should you look for to say, okay, they can stay home alone?
Yeah, for my dad, I looked at things like, could he still shower by himself? Could he still dress himself? Could he still make it up and down the stairs? Could he still warm up his food? Was he able to get in and out of the house without any problems? And for my dad, he had a walker, but he was still able to, get in and out of the house just fine and take a walk and was, very mobile. So cognitively, he was fine too. If we called, he answered the phone and there was no problem with cognition or even handling his finances. He was fine with all that. So those were all the things I looked at to know that, yep, he was still able to stay in his home as long as, again, I was helping with the cooking, the cleaning, and the washing the clothes.
Yeah. So now here comes the next step. So now as the adult child, you go, this is not safe for my parent to stay here in their house alone. It's dangerous. It's not a safe situation. And okay, it's time to put them into a facility. And there are so many different aspects of a facility. And I don't think people understand the difference between independent living, assisted living, skilled nursing, and memory care. So can we break each one down? Let's start with independent living. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think as the name implies, there are facilities where you just have your own apartment and you're still living independently and they're probably providing you with your meals, but you don't need any help with medication or getting dressed or showering. You're truly living independently, although, again, you're probably in a place where, your meals are being provided for and even probably laundry is too, but it's really independent living.
Independent. What about assisted living? What happens in assisted living?
Then assistant living, which again is where my dad ended up, you do need assistance, as the name implies, right? You need help with showering or dressing and somebody to help provide your medications. And again, your meals are provided. And so you're sitting in a communal setting, getting your meals, but you really can't manage those things on your own at this point. You really do need help in order to live day to day.
So there is someone there to assist you with every aspect of your life, right?
Right.
Skilled nursing care. That's where my mom is. She, as I said, she fell. She has multiple injuries, broken bones. She is in skilled nursing. What is that all about?
Yeah. And as the, again, name applies, and some people actually think of it still as nursing homes, but again, they call them now skilled nursing.
Yep.
Because again, you really need help at a much higher level. Something in assisted living, for example, my dad could stay in his room all day by himself or even take a walk down the hall. He was okay. But skilled nursing, you really need help with almost everything at this point. You're like your mom, injured, just can't take care of yourself on almost any level. And so that's where skilled nursing comes in.
Yeah, and they offer occupational therapy, physical therapy. There are nurses there to help you with every aspect. And then there's memory care. Who is that for?
For Alzheimer's patients, just like you'd expect. And in a lot of places, like where my dad was, it was an assisted living facility with a memory care wing. So a lot of places, in assisted living will actually have a memory care wing. And that's for people who really can't, they literally can't get out of the wing. It's locked because, they're at risk for, going off the property and getting lost or, harming themselves. So, it's people who really have Alzheimer's or some sort of dementia where they really need to be watched and guarded to remain safe.
Yeah, they could wander away. All right, so you've broken down. Now, as the adult child, I need to put my parent in one of these situations. What are some of the questions I should be asking when I go to these facilities to look for things? What are the things I should look for? What are the questions I should be asking? And these questions could apply to any of those facilities that we talked about.
Yeah, and I just want to say before I answer that the one thing we have at AARP is a great resource. It's aarp.org/caregiving. And if you go on that website, it actually gives you a list of all the questions you could consider to ask. And the first thing I want to say is, if at all possible, you've just got to visit facilities in person. That's what we do with my dad, and it made all the difference. You can look at websites or even use services like A Place for Mom, which I want to tell people about. Is actually a for-profit organization. You don't pay, but they're getting paid by the facility. So that's something important to know. But I think the best thing to do is to go and see these facilities. And so you get to see how many, assistants are there, per ratio, per resident. How do they manage the medication? Are the rooms clean? What does the food look like? Like, we literally sat down and had lunch, at different places to taste the food. What's the food like? What kind of activities do they have? And you can really tell by looking at a facility. Does it look like it's going to be a place that's safe? That keeps, you're going to keep your parents safe. They're going to be able to have socialization and activities and things to do, so they're just not sitting in their room all day. So, but I really encourage people to look at, our website and get a whole list of the questions to consider.
Yeah, that's great to have before you go to these facilities. And I agree with you. You really do need. Now, what about if you're an adult child and let's say you live in California and your mom is in Pennsylvania and you necessarily can't make it to tour these facilities? Are there any types of services that will do the vetting for you to help you make these tough choices?
Well, as I mentioned, there is an organization called A Place for Mom, and that is what it is. You talk to someone on the phone and they help you kind of try to determine what's the best place to put a loved one. Now, the service on your end is free, but again, it's important to know that the different facilities pay this organization. So, it's not a completely neutral process, but really, I think, it's the best you're going to be able to do if you're really living states away.
Yeah. So there are services then that will vet these places for you. That's good to know because I think that's a stressor too. Figuring out, how am I going to get there? How am I going to look at all of these places when I live so far away? Okay, here comes the tough one. You got to have your conversation with your family members, with your siblings, with your elderly parent, and convince them this is a tough conversation.
Yeah,
Help us with this conversation. What do you say to an elderly parent who does not want to leave their home and does not want to go into assisted living or any of these other facilities? How do you handle that?
Yeah, the truth is you have to be brave and you have to be honest. And it's a really tough conversation. My sister and I, had determined that it was time for my dad to go in assisted living when he kept falling. He was falling constantly and I could no longer pick him up. And so it just broke my heart that he'd be laying on the floor for a half an hour as I waited for either my brother-in-law or nephew to come by and help me pick him up. And so when that was happening constantly, it was just clear that I could no longer take care of him. And so my sister and I discussed it. We agreed that it was time to go to a facility. And then I had to tell him And we found a place first. And so I gave him 6 weeks notice so he could kind of psychologically prepare. But it was an incredibly hard conversation. I get emotional when I think about it now because he literally begged me not there, and kept trying to kind of negotiate with me on, if I do this, can I stay? And it broke my heart. And but you just have to be resolved. And in fact, really, I realized it was the best thing for him. It wasn't just about me. And I'm not going to lie, I was exhausted at that point. But it was the best thing for him because I just couldn't take care of him anymore. So you just have to be resolved, and it's a tough conversation, but you just have to there are times in your life when you just have to be brutally honest with people. And I told my dad it was hard. I didn't want to do this, but I just couldn't take care of him anymore. I couldn't let him keep laying on the floor while we were waiting for someone to come, pick him up. But it was incredibly difficult. I don't want to sugarcoat it. It was tough.
Yeah, I can't imagine. And then once he got there, did he actually like it? Did he enjoy it?
I wouldn't say he enjoyed it, but the one thing I promised him before he went in is I told him that someone would visit him every single day. And we kept that promise. I was there at least 5 days a week, and then my sister and niece would go 1 day a week as well. And so somebody went to visit him every single day for a couple hours a day. And I think the phrasing I would use was, it was fine. It was okay. He didn't like it, but he didn't hate it either. So it was fine. And he did make some friends, and he did, but he really was at the last 8 months of his life. So he really wasn't even somebody who could be very social or participate in the activities. He had really declined, but he was okay with it. But he wasn't happy, but it was okay.
Yeah, but he ended up doing it, and you were acting in his best interests. I mean, you didn't do this because you wanted to. You're at this point like you don't have any choice, right, as you clearly pointed out. Clearly, there are emotional issues here. Clearly, there are financial issues. All of these facilities are very, very expensive. And, the price can range depending on where they go and where you live, the location is. Some of these places are $10,000 a month, right?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was going to say that. I mean, the thing is, when you're trying to make these decisions is, for a lot of people, the cost is prohibitive. I mean, it was $10,000 a month for my dad to go to this facility. And fortunately, he could afford it. But that is a lot of money, for people to put out. And there's going to be some people that we realize that just can't afford that. And so then what do? That's the tough conversation, too, or the tough choice, because there are a lot of people who can't afford $10,000 a month.
Yeah. So you've got the emotional issues, you've got the financial issues. What about legal issues? What issues do you need to deal with when we're talking about these very difficult decisions?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked that. I mean, a couple of years even before he came to live with me, when it was clear he was declining, we got a power of attorney document set up, giving my sister financial power of attorney. Given my public health background, I was given medical power of attorney. And then we also, had a living will drafted. And all of this is when he was obviously very cognitive and aware, and he made these choices willingly. So it was really, I think it's absolutely essential that as you see someone declining, you have, by the way, a regular will too. But in terms of what we're talking about, caregiving, power of attorney, financial power of attorney, medical power of attorney, and a living will. Really, those documents really served us as my dad declined, and then he was getting hospitalized. So really important to have.
So you've had the tough talk. You place your parent, your loved one, in one of these facilities. There's a problem now. Okay. Maybe your elderly parent is saying they're not getting the great care, or they're missing meals, or somebody isn't coming to check on them. What do you do? Like, what recourse do I have at that point to make sure that my parent is going to be cared for in one of these facilities, and then that the facility isn't going to retaliate because you've complained? What do you do?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because one of the many reasons we went to see him every day was because we were looking for all of that. were they taking care of him the way they should? And I'll be honest with you, there even in just 8 months' time, there were 3 different occasions where we met with the executive director to complain that he wasn't being showered the way he should, or they weren't making his bed, or they were leaving dirty clothes on the floor. You really have to, even when someone's in assisted living, you have to be so diligent. It's not like you put him in assisted living and then you just go, okay, he's
Right.
being taken care of now. You really have to stay on top of it. So our first step was to, of course, meet with the senior staff. But then after that, if you're still unhappy, there is an ombudsman, for the state of Pennsylvania. And so it's called the ombudsman. And you can contact the ombudsman. And by law, by the way, every facility has to have a pamphlet posted in the facility telling you about that right and giving the phone number. So, that is posted everywhere in, skilled nursing or assisted living facilities. And you can call, the state and have them try to intervene if you really feel like there's a problem and you're not getting satisfaction for the issue.
And what does that person do then? The ombudsman.
Yeah, they're supposed to be what you think is they're supposed to intervene. They're almost supposed to be a representative for you and the well-being of the resident and, be a liaison with the facility to try to, resolve the issues that are going on.
Yeah. I know that AARP Pennsylvania is very active in all of this and advocating for seniors. Talk to me about the services at AARP Pennsylvania, the services that you folks offer to help people like myself and other, adult children with elderly parents and all of the different resources. You mentioned some of them before.
Yeah, I really think the best thing to do is go to our website, aarp.org/caregiving, because there you will really find a plethora of information. It does list it in different categories like financial, like emotional, how to draw up a power of attorney, how to draw up, living wills, really lots of information on everything we talked about. The one thing we even have is this support group that you can join, an online support group for people who, you're exhausted, you want to talk to somebody else who's going through the same thing. So we even have an online support group. So I truly can't think of any category we haven't addressed on our website, which just talks about everything you need to know. I mentioned earlier, questions to ask when you're looking at a assisted living facility. So any category you can think of when it comes to caregiving, we've got it listed on our website.
So everything that we're addressing in this podcast, then you have on this website, I'm going to say backup information or support materials. Everything that we're talking about, you're going to be able to find that on the website.
Yeah, that's correct. And again, even an online support group if you just want to commiserate with people across the country going through the same thing you are.
And give us that website one more time.
aarp.org/caregiving.
Something else that I want to talk about, because this is really tough. This is really tough. It's a really difficult situation. It is draining in every aspect. You lived through it for 10 and a half years. God bless you. I don't know how you actually did it. But in my particular situation, I'm being honest, just like you, I'm starting to feel compassion fatigue. And I understand that that is a real thing, that you start to get fatigued. I want to have compassion for my mother. I want to help her. I want to take her phone calls, but I'm starting to feel fatigued and exhausted. What is compassion fatigue?
Well, no, I think you just said it, right? You want to do all those things, but at some point, because we're human, you just don't have it in you. And in my case, how it manifested itself was, I have 2 great nieces, one's 3, one's 5, and I wanted to spend time with them. But there would be things like, for example, Thanksgiving. And instead of getting to spend the whole day with my whole family, Dad would want to go back to assisted living facility, right? And for what? To sit in a chair. That's just the truth. So I'm missing out on being with my family, and having fun with the next generation so I can take them back and be in a chair, literally. So he can sit in a chair, and so it's those kind of times when it's that kind of compassion fatigue you talk about, because, it's like, when's it about me? You get to a point where you're like, when's it about me? I'm missing out on so many things. That when's it my turn? So, I totally get it. That is the thing. You'd have to be superhuman not to feel that way.
And I think that we need to like give ourselves some grace, as you mentioned before, and say, you know what, it's okay. It is okay to feel that way. And you went through this, as you said at the beginning of this podcast, for over 10 years. As you look back on that, what are some of the lessons learned from that experience that you had with your own father? And what advice can you give to other people who are in your situation, trying to figure out what to do? You even brought your dad into your home, which we didn't address. And that's a whole nother issue. Lessons learned and advice.
I think the biggest lesson learned is, honest communication. And I'll give you an example. I have 2 siblings. And so when it looked like it was, even when my mom first died and it was clear my father would not be able to take care of himself, cooking, cleaning, et cetera, they were very honest that they weren't going to do it. And so I decided that I would. But again, having a really honest conversation with my siblings about, nope, I'm not going to do that. I know dad needs it. And they actually 10 years earlier had wanted him to go to independent living. And same thing when it really became clear that he couldn't live on his own. We got together as a family and had an honest conversation, and they were very clear again, no, dad can't come live with me. So if you want to take care of him, you can do it, but we're not going to. And so I think the biggest advice was, and the biggest lesson learned was so important to have honest conversations, because then you're making informed choices. I got to decide, okay, am I going to bring dad into the house or not? But it was with informed choices. And they were also very clear that they weren't going to help very much. My sister was newly retired and traveling the world, and my brother's in Arizona. So they were going to help somewhat, but, they were not going to change their life for this. And again, on the one hand, you could, not think well of them. But on the other hand, I appreciated the honesty. And then again, I was making informed decisions. So I really can't stress enough that honest conversations are really key to this working out for the best.
How did you not get angry with your siblings and resent them for saying, I'm out?
Because, I'd be lying if I said I never resented them, especially when they were taking trips all around and I couldn't schedule a trip because nobody was there to take care of dad when he lived with me. So I'd be lying if I said I never got resentful. But for the most part, I really realized that they were living their truth, and I could have made that same decision. Nobody made me decide to have him live with me or to cook and clean. He could have frankly afforded to hire someone, but I loved him and I thought I wanted to do that for him. And I even thought I owed him that as having been a great dad. And they didn't see it the same way. And, at some point being angry just doesn't, solve anything. Yeah. So it's better to just accept, your realities and again, make your decisions based on the information you have.
So what did you do for yourself during those 10 years? We talked about as a caregiver, you're caring for your elderly parent, but you got to take care of yourself. What did you do for yourself, or didn't you do anything for yourself for those 10 years?
Well, I definitely, and again, the first few years especially, wasn't hard. It was the latter years where it got very difficult. But I would, schedule time to go away for a weekend, and my sister would, check in on it for, those couple of days. So it's not like, again, I don't want to imply that my siblings didn't do anything. They just, probably did 10% each, and I did the other 80%. So you would have to be worked out. But yeah, I would go away for a weekend or have lunch with a friend or something like that. And I just can't stress enough how important that is to get away for yourself and get your own time. But I told you in the beginning, I definitely didn't take care of myself, the way I should have. And that's one of the things I'm trying to do now, because he passed away, a few months ago. So that's what I'm trying to do now, is start my own chapter, we kind of start again and have my own life. But yeah, I definitely, suffered in all the ways I mentioned earlier.
Yeah. And I do think you need to take that time, as you said, maybe go away for the weekend and not feel guilty about it, because you kind of have to hit refresh so that you can take on the next month's worth of whatever is going to come your way. You need to take a break, or you're going to have your own mental breakdown. You're going to have your own emotional breakdown. But we feel guilty. We feel guilty all the time, and I don't know how to deal with that. I don't know how to deal with it.
Well, that's fine. I mean, I have to admit, I never felt guilty when I went away, because it was kind of that airplane model you always hear about, right? You got to put the mask on yourself first, and then the child. I never felt guilty at all when I went away for the very reason you stressed, because then I knew I'm refreshed, I'm ready to come back and be charged and take care of them, and I certainly had a right to take care of myself and enjoy my life. Because by the way, one of the things we haven't talked about is I'm a senior citizen myself. So you're a senior taking care of another senior, and I'm in the twilight chapter of my life too. So I never felt guilty about taking time. I felt it was the best way I could take care of him, and that I deserved it too, because I'm a senior citizen myself.
Is there any advice that you would have for people in this situation? I know you talked about having an open conversation. If somebody is in this tough situation trying to figure out, do I let my parents stay home alone? Do I take them in and care for them? Do I bring in a caregiver? Do I put them in a facility? What advice would you have for somebody who is like really stressed out over there and trying to figure out what's best?
Well, in some ways, the situation determines itself. And what I mean by that is, again, if you can't afford to go into assisted living, that kind of, makes the decision easier, right?
Yeah.
Then can you find someone you can trust? And by the way, that's a whole nother conversation, right? About how do you find a trustworthy person you can bring into your home, to watch somebody for part of the day or all the day or something. But, some of these, decisions kind of become self-evident when you can tell, can someone still take care of themselves or not? Could we put them in assisted living? Oh, if we can afford it, sure. But what if we can't? Now, what are our choices? And so I just think, information, and honest conversations. But some of these things kind of get self-determined by financial realities and the physical realities.
So how do you find somebody you can trust? If you have decided that, okay, the parent is going to come and live with me, or somebody's going to come and check on them, that's another scary proposition.
That is a really scary proposition, because especially from my AARP responsibilities, I know that elder fraud, elder abuse, those are real.
Yeah.
You bring your home, and are they going to steal your identity? Are they going to steal items from your home? Are they going to hurt your parent? And I have to be really honest about this one. I didn't solve that problem. I would have loved to have somebody come in a couple hours a day, even to my house. And so I could have gone out to lunch, but I'll be honest, I never figured that one out. I didn't trust going through some of these agencies. What did I know about these people? I didn't have any kind of friend of a friend who did caregiving. So the truth is, for me, I never solved that problem, and I would have loved to. But I think that's actually one of the most difficult things of all, is trying to find caregivers that you can trust to come into your home.
It's scary. It is absolutely scary. And as you pointed out, you hear so much about elder fraud and stealing identities and whatnot. And if your elderly parent doesn't have their faculties about them and this stranger is in your home, that adds a whole nother level of stress to the equation. As you pointed out, I haven't figured that one out either. I don't know how you find somebody that you can truly trust. That's a tough situation too. So, Joanne, as we close out this podcast, what are some of your final thoughts on this tough topic that we've been chatting about?
Well, one of the things I think is to kind of think about this as much in advance as possible. Believe it or not, when my parents were just turning 70, we used to have these conversations, about what happens if mom dies first, if dad dies first. We didn't pretend that our parents weren't going to get old or die, and they didn't either. So I was really glad that we had those conversations when our parents were in their late 60s, to early 70s, about what would happen, because that made, really a difference. And so I just think, we're so reluctant to have these conversations, especially in this culture, but we just have to stop being reluctant about it and just be realistic. Our parents are going to get older. We're going to get older. I actually my sister and I have these conversations now with my niece, right, about what happens when we get older, and I'm only in my 60s. So I just think way in advance, you really have to be having these conversations and be honest about it, honest about what you're willing to do as a child, honest as a parent or as a person what you want, and then have those conversations while everybody's still young enough and cognitive enough, so that you can make some, informed decisions way in advance. And I just think that's really the most important thing.
And I think that's great advice. One more time, that website for AARP Pennsylvania for people to get information and resources for caregivers. One more time.
AARP.org/caregiving.
Awesome. Joanne, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You were a wealth of information, and I really, really I love the fact that you were so transparent and honest about your feelings about your own situation. So thank you.
Thanks for having me, Flora.
All right. Again, as I said at the top of the podcast, this was going to be a tough one. A lot of people are facing some really tough decisions concerning their elderly parent, what to do with them. And hopefully this podcast shed some light and gave you some more information if you were in this situation and you need to make these tough decisions. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Do me a favor on our YouTube channel, Chick2Chick USA, like and subscribe. That way, every time we come out with a new podcast episode, you're going to get an alert on your phone. So once again, thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. And we will be back soon with a new podcast episode.